Father Miguel, whenever we're talking about Lent, right, the main thing that we always emphasize is the fasting, almsgiving, and prayer. And I think Lent is really like a time where a lot of people kind of ask themselves, okay, what's my prayer life looking like? Am I supposed to change it in some ways? Am I supposed to make more time for prayer? And like that's really good and beautiful stuff, but sometimes what happens too is we're like, all right, I'm now going to dedicate myself to doing this much prayer, and it can kind of quickly fall off if we start to get disappointed with what it looks like. My first week at the seminary, during our orientation, they told us we were going to do a silent retreat. I had never done a silent retreat before. And then we had a talk on doing a holy hour and what a holy hour was. And right after that talk, I met with my spiritual director for the first time. And my spiritual director he introduced himself to me, and he's like, do you have any questions? Do you have anything you want to talk about as we start this retreat? And I told him, yeah, do you guys actually expect me to pray for a full hour? He's a holy spiritual director. He put up with a lot from me. But, um, and he was really gentle. He was like, let's start with 15 minutes because he could tell where I was at. But building a prayer life is a really intimidating thing when you think of your own prayer life. Like, what do you think helped you to build it up? What do you think has like helped you to grow in it?
You know, early on, I started, obviously, like everybody else, learning prayers from your family environment, mom and dad, my grandmother teaching us how to pray, addressing God as Father, learning the Our Father, making all these formal prayers. And as part of that routine that began to somehow mold you and shape you in your spiritual life, and ways of communicating with God. But then as time went by, you begin to learn also that there are other ways in which you can address God and talk to God in an informal way, like you would with a
Mm-hmm.
friend, like you and I are doing right now. Just
Yeah,
normal
exactly.
conversation in which I can just bare my soul and be honest and open about the things that I'm dealing with or struggling with. What are my hopes? What are my dreams? What are my challenges, difficulties, and just simply be able to talk to a good friend, to learn and discover that there's a relationship here that's tangible, that the good Lord is present, listening to you, but also who wants to speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
So how in that informal prayer I'm able to express all this and at the same time be able to also stop and allow him to speak within the silence of my heart, able to connect with his voice, addressing me, motivating me, lifting me up.
Mm-hmm.
I
Exactly.
always remember when I was diagnosed with MS, and I remember being in the hospital, and it was the night before I was going to have a procedure
Mm-hmm.
to confirm my situation, my diagnosis. And I remember just inviting my family to go home and to leave me alone in the room. I needed that moment of silence, of communicating with God and dealing with the reality of something that was unknown to me at that particular moment, and how I was able to basically give myself permission to tell God exactly how I felt. And in that dialogue, like a good friend, be brutally honest and say to him, I'm disappointed. I'm angry at
Mm-hmm.
you. Why is this happening to me? What's going on? Did you forget that I work for you? Some of the things that I would say, like why am I going through this? And I don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm scared. I'm afraid. I
Yeah.
am at this moment vulnerable and powerless because I really don't know what this is going to lead me to. So I really had a big conversation with him in which I was able to really express to him my disappointment, my anger, my fears, but also my cry for help, that I need you, that I depend on you. Somehow help me get some peace and some awareness that I'm not dealing with this alone.
It makes me think of when Peter sees Christ walking on the water, right? And Peter says, Lord, if it is you, command me to walk on the water and come to you, right? Like, what an authentic prayer that is for him to say, like, it's my desire to be closer to you. Like, Jesus, make it happen for me to be closer to you. But then, even when Peter starts walking, he sees the storm happening around him, the waves. He starts to sink, right? He cries out, Lord, save me. And even that is such an authentic prayer, right? Like it's not defined by whether or not you're being holy enough, by whether or not you're telling God the right words, but it's like, can you look at the desires of your heart and be willing to trust God enough with them? Because what I always love too about that is, what was Peter's desire? To be closer to Jesus. When he sinks and he cries out, Lord, save me, Jesus is right there to catch him. Like, he got his desire. He was closer to Jesus. Prayer's not about us being perfect. Prayer's about us, like, giving ourselves to God.
And how would you, in that giving yourself to God, where does patience fall in the equation? Because sometimes when we're praying as human beings, we want it now, we want it right at this moment, but we realize that, wait a second, this is taking way too long, and I desperately need an answer. How do you deal with the reality that you have to be patient in that trust, in that waiting for God to show us the way?
I think first and foremost, whenever we talk about patience, like, sometimes people get this idea of like, I'm going to pray for patience so that way when there's something that normally annoys me, it won't annoy me. The virtue of patience doesn't mean things no longer affect you, right? It means you can still choose charity, you can still choose love in those moments where something is wearing you down, where something is fatiguing you. I think of the fact that Jesus, when he saw the lack of belief in some of the people he encountered, in the scriptures it says he gave a deep sigh, right? Jesus was annoyed, he was frustrated, it was wearing him down, but he still chose charity in the midst of that. God can work so much in the silence. When we think he's not moving us in the right direction, he oftentimes is doing it in ways that, like, if we were aware, we wouldn't be able to follow. When I was halfway through seminary, I was really struggling with whether or not I was going to continue on. I didn't know if God was calling me to stay and become a priest, if he wanted me to leave. And we did a silent retreat for 6 days. And every day of the retreat, I would wake up and I would say, God, I'm listening to you. I want to hear your voice. Like, tell me, do you want me to stay or do you want me to go? And every night I would end the night by saying, God, there were so many incredible graces. Thank you so much. But you didn't answer my question. I was like, when are you going to tell me so I know what to do? But by the end of the retreat, what I had realized was I wasn't looking for God to tell me do A or do B. I was looking for God to, like, show me how I could receive his love the most. And that love wasn't going to be received by me figuring out whether or not I get married or become a priest, because God will always love us. That love comes from just simply saying, like, God, I'm going to trust you, and I want to give myself to you first. And eventually, probably 4 months later was when the Lord made it clear he wanted me to continue towards priesthood. But he wanted me to say yes to a deeper love first. It's like, whenever we bring to God, here's my desire, he has a plan where he's going to say, I'm going to fill that desire and also the ones you don't even know about.
Was it always that way? Because as human beings, there are moments in our lives when we might treat prayer as a way of manipulating or attempting to manipulate God so that he can fit into our agenda, into our demands, into our expectations, as opposed to taking the passenger seat and allow him to be the driver.
I still find myself struggling with that, where it's like, okay, God, I know what's supposed to happen here. I know what's going to bring out the best outcome. Why aren't you working on this? I've set up my plan. And it's even like, it can happen in, like, even little ways, right? You're having a conversation with someone who's going through something difficult. And, you're sitting with them, you're praying, you're asking the Holy Spirit for guidance. And then it's like, if I say, well, can you tell me a little more about this? Because I'm thinking this is the important thing to look into. And actually, it wasn't the important thing at all. We go in a completely different direction. And I can be stuck thinking to myself, well, no, like, I'm pretty sure this is the thing that needs to be addressed most. And I just imagine, like, the Holy Spirit being like, you asked me to guide you. Like, it's like turning on the GPS and still turning the wrong direction. And
Recalculating.
yeah.
But I think of the sick. I think of those who are in the hospital. I think of just recently, even thinking about Pope Francis and how he, in his own reality with the double pneumonia and all that, I can only imagine him in that bed in the hospital, how he turned to prayer, looking for that abandonment. Is that a correct word? You know English better than I do.
I concur. I
You
concur.
concur with that? Of completely saying, surrendering. There's something about the sick that really I admire when I go visit them. And you see when they're really connected trustingly to the Lord in prayer, to know that, may not know what the outcome might be of their situation, but somehow they find hope in addressing God and presenting their brokenness, their physical ailments. And there's a great strength in that prayer that they are able to, elevate to God as they speak with Him for mercy.
Sometimes I'll share this with some of the visits to the sick that I'll do. I'll share with them like, thank you for letting your heart be a place that the Lord can just come and dwell here, that He can be pleased just to rest in you. I think that's the invitation for all of us during this Lent, right? As we recognize more and more how the Lord wants to be joined to us, let's just focus on making our hearts a place that He rests, a place that He can delight in being in with us.